You're listening to the Low Pressure Podcast, the podcast for skiers.
Presented by CMH Heli-Skiing and Peak Performance.
The Low Pressure Podcast is sponsored by CMH Heli-Skiing, where you can choose from 11 unique locations and experiences, including 4, 5, 6, and 7-day signature trips, the brand new single-day trips. You can do small groups with just you, 4 friends, and a guide, or the private and exclusive, where you get the whole place just to yourself. So find your next adventure at cmhheli.com. The Low Pressure Podcast is also sponsored by Peak Performance. There are many ways to make it down a mountain, but the best line is your line. And the adventure is there, so make it yours. Visit peakperformance.com and get the gear to unlock your free ride spirit. Welcome, ladies, to the Low Pressure Podcast studio, aka my house. I'm glad to have you here. Please introduce yourselves to the people that are listening.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. I love Whistler. We come back every year. I've had some of my best moments in Whistler and some of my most tragic moments in Whistler, which we're going to talk about both of those things. And my name is Jeanee MoCrazy.
Right, and who do you have with you?
Hi, I am Jeanee Crane-Mauzy. I am Jamie's sister. I also experienced many of, or all of her ups and downs here in Whistler, as well as my own. And we're here to talk about our story and our relationship with this town and mountains and skiing in general.
Yeah. Awesome. So we're going to start to the start, but before we do that, I want to ask you, you told me last night, did you legally change your name?
I did. Yeah, so one of the amazing things that happened right here in Whistler was I came to Whistler and I got married in May of 2022 at the top of the mountain. And during that process, we decided, my husband and I, that my nickname had been MoCrazy my whole life.
Right.
Starting when I was like 8 months old for my mom. It was, oh, my little MoCrazy. And so I legally changed my last name to Jeanee MoCrazy.
That's so awesome. And I guess it makes sense too, because you were going through am I taking your names? Like, yeah. Well, actually, no, I'm going to just go well off the board and change it completely.
Yeah, and actually it's kind of funny because since I was going off the boards and not taking his name, I actually had to go through the legal process of changing my name. Yeah. So I had to have like a court case about it to make sure I wasn't like a sex offender trying to like escape justice or something. So I had to go through all these different protocols and the court case. And the guy, he actually ended up Googling me. He was like, why does this girl want to change her last name to MoCrazy? And I have a lot of information about me on Google. So he spent the whole court case telling me how excited he was to help me with the journey.
Like the judge or the...
Yeah, the judge. He was like, yeah, I thought it was kind of crazy that this person wanted to change their name to MoCrazy. So I looked it up and then I just got infatuated by you. So I'm really glad and I'm honored to be part of your journey. And I hope you keep promoting the MoCrazy strong story to the world about brain injury awareness.
Awesome.
I was like, oh, thanks.
Well, that's helpful. Thanks, dude. Much appreciated, Mr. Judge Man.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your story. So let's start maybe younger, right? You guys come from a family of skiers. I watched your film last night, which is really, really fantastic. I was sitting next to Amy Jane David, who was hosting, and I looked at her. I was like, don't look at me. I was starting to tear up a little bit. I think especially when you met the people that were your first responders. But before we get to that, so I know you mentioned it. You suffered a traumatic brain injury here in Whistler during a competition. Was it WSI?
Yes. World
Skiing Snowboard Invitational. And basically it was one of those things where, you know, if anything went wrong, you may not be sitting here with me today, so to speak. And then the film you put out was kind of a bit of telling your story, but also a little bit of you don't necessarily have to play the cards you're dealt, so to speak. You know, you can reshuffle the deck and give yourself a new hand. So kind of thing is kind of what I gathered from it. But before we get to that, I'd love to kind of hear your story, how you kind of got into the ski industry, and then what led you to that point.
Yeah. Well, both of us started skiing before we can remember, as babies. Our grandmother, she actually was she competed in skiing and was World Cup downhill champion, and actually in some of the first ever Warren Miller movies.
Really, your grandmother?
Yeah.
Yes, in 1948, she won the World Cup tour in ski racing.
No way.
So we were basically born into it. She started a resort in upstate New York, and her brother won in New Hampshire, and we grew up on the East Coast, in the Connecticut to New Hampshire area. And so, yeah, our mom put us on at 1. As soon as you could walk, you could ski. So that was never really a question in our family. We always skied. And then we actually grew up in ski racing programs. And then Jamie was the one that decided to switch to freestyle.
Yeah, because I was also a gymnast. So I was very competitive in like everything that I did.
Right.
When I was 9 years old, I actually won state championships in gymnastics. And the same year, I won state championships in ski racing, which was exciting. And so I was
Which
interviewed.
state?
So I won state championships in New Hampshire for skiing, and I won state championships in Connecticut for gymnastics.
Oh, wow.
Because we lived in Connecticut, but we skied in New Hampshire. Then we'd go out for long weekends, and then we'd go out for the winters. And we were both homeschooled, so we were like, no school, we'll just ski all the time. Well, I shouldn't say no school. We always did lots of school. But something that's kind of cool is that we would literally spend in the fall and the spring, we would go for a hike, like a couple-hour hike in the White Mountain National Forest, and we would do our lessons at the top of the peak. And so we would, we had curriculums, and we'd do all this stuff, and then we would like hike down.
You just get it done in an appropriate amount of time rather than wasting 8 hours a day waiting for people that may not be as fast. Basically, it's the lowest common denominator in school a lot of the times, right? You got to do a lesson that everyone can complete, and then there's those people that'll finish it in 10 minutes, and then there's those people that'll do it in an hour.
Right, and it was very privileged because our mom was a teacher. She has her master's in education from Columbia Teachers College in New York, and so she could tailor the lessons to each of us. And we have a younger sibling as well, and we were 3.5 to 4 years apart, so we were learning at a different level, different speeds, but we could do it around other things as well. So we would ski, and then we would do school after skiing. We also didn't take all summer off. We would do school in the summer. We would take more breaks, but spread out around the year.
Right. But it wasn't like an 8 to 3 sort of thing like most schools, which is great because then you can, all right, well, this is the block we're going to get that schoolwork done, and you can just focus in on it. And there's so much less wasted time, and there's so much more time for activities.
Yes, and my mom was able to combine it. Jamie was a very hyperactive kid, so she could learn, multiplication by jumping around or throwing snowballs, and I had an undiagnosed reading problem for quite a long time, and that was able to have that kind of special attention, and I was still able to have all of my cognition advance without actually reading the words until we were able to get the right diagnosis and help to be able to see the words to read in the first place.
And I was, as Jeannie pointed out, a very hyperactive kid, which a lot of people actually in the ski and snowboard communities are. And with hyperactive kids, you're always moving, and but because I've figured out from such a young age how to structure, get this done, move on to this, it really helped me broaden instead of feeling like I was only one, but I could get things done, and because I had been actually diagnosed as a hyperactive kid and stuff, but instead of me having to sit and like squirming and thinking I was stupid because I didn't really want to learn this, I just was like, okay, I have 10 minutes to do this, get it done.
Yeah, I understand that. I've actually, like you said, in the ski industry, it's common. I've spoken to many people like that who are like, I had a very non-traditional schooling growing up as a child, or I would be in class and the teacher would be like, all right, you need to go outside for a little bit, and you two can go outside, play just outside the window so I can keep an eye on you. And they would go and do their thing, and then they would bring them back in just to get all that all that energy, all that pent up like life that they need to live. Do you know what I mean, that you can't really do while you're sitting at a desk listening to a lecture, or reading a multiplication table.
Yeah, and I actually went to high school for 1 year, and I went to Holderness Prep School, and I got 6 excellent efforts and all A's. So I always was very intelligent, but I never thought I was like very intelligent. I just was myself.
Exactly right, and that's another thing too is when you go into school, you're always comparing yourself.
Yeah.
And maybe not going out of your way to, but you can't help but not, because everybody's there. Everyone knows what's happening with this person and that person. It's just kind of a
You're judged all the time.
it's just a social thing that happens when you're around a group of people. There's always comparisons, whether it's I'm in school or that guy's a little taller than me or she's a little shorter than me or his hair is more red than mine is. Or do you know what I mean? So that's interesting because you can, with the homeschooling, you can focus just on yourself and then zero in on your own personal strengths, like you said, and fix things or improve weaknesses.
Yeah, and Jamie was incredibly competitive. So in sport, she had a lot of that push for competitiveness and wanting to be the best. She always grew up wanting to, go to the Olympics, to be a professional athlete. I didn't. I had no aspirations to be a competitive, professional athlete. Sports were just what we did, which was great. And I did my first freestyle competition on accident, actually. Jamie told me that I had to train this mogul competition with her in Waterville Valley, New Hampshire, where we lived, because she didn't have any friends in the sport yet, and so I had to do it. And so I trained with her, and then her and my mom were like, oh, and we signed you up for the competition tomorrow, and we already paid for it, so now you have to do it. And I was like, I don't want to do it. I've skied moguls 2 days of my life. I don't want to do a competition. And they were like, well, kind of too bad. So then I did it, and it was fun, and so I did some more.
How did you do?
I don't know. I don't remember how I did. I made it down. I thought it was fun. I don't think I got a medal or anything, but it was fun. I did. And the East Coast of the U.S., we have what's called the Bees competition, which is kids. I was 12, I think, at the time, or 13. And so I did some ski racing and freestyle, and slowly went just into freestyle and specialized in half pipe, and got invited to do the inaugural Youth Olympics in 2012 in Innsbruck, Austria. And each country only had one representative per discipline. So I was the sole U.S. halfpipe girl. And when I was at Youth Olympics is when I was like, this is pretty fun. Maybe I should do it a bit more seriously. Being a professional athlete could be a cool life journey. And we had moved to Park City that year, and so I had the availability to really put a lot more into it and end up on the World Cup tour and then do tour and world championships and stuff.
So for a reluctant athlete.
Yes, I think I'm one of the few athletes that people know that really had no aspirations as a kid to be a professional athlete.
You're just good at it, and so you did it.
Yeah, it just wasn't, I don't know. I was always the timid, shy little sister, and so I was fine following Jamie, but I didn't have that as innate competitiveness that many professional athletes have. Right. It was more my whole family is athletic, and so I was always very sportsy, and I was good at sports, and I do have the competitiveness when I'm in it. It just wasn't I'd have to be the best in the world to have value. I wanted to grow up and be a mom. I still want to be a mom. Right. I don't have biological kids yet, but, and I wanted to do business and stuff, and I always thought I'd be athletic, but I just hadn't put that much thought into it.
It's interesting. And then for yourself, being a sister, it's neat to see kind of how different people from the same family develop their own personalities, whereas you were I want to do this, correct?
Yeah, I was very competitive, and when she said that she didn't think that going to the Olympics was her value, would decide her value, I was kind of the opposite. When I was 6 years old, you'd say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would say, an Olympic gold medalist. And I did everything I could to get to that level. Actually, the first time I ever came to Whistler, I was 18 years old. and I was at a competition. And at the time, no girls were flipping off of the rails, and they had this big cannon rail. And I went to the competition, and on the big cannon rail, I slid it, and then I flipped off of it and landed. So I became the first woman to flip off a rail in competition, and I made X Games. And that all was from the Whistler competition, which a lot of people don't actually know. My Whistler journey
Whistler connection, yeah.
With making X Games. The X Games that I became the first woman in the world to double flip at, doing a double backflip. I made that X Games from flipping off of a rail in Whistler.
Oh, amazing. And we had talked about this before we started, but Whistler, there's a long connected thread of Whistler in your life, not only through competition, like you just mentioned, but also through your injury. So getting into your competitions, was it mostly slope style? Were you in half pipe as well?
I did both. I did slope style and half pipe.
Right. And this is about 10 years ago or so? What's the time frame, just for people, because they're going to do some, people listening are going to go online and they're going to do some Googling.
Yeah, like 12 to 8 years ago.
Right.
So
that was right kind of when, women's freestyle skiing was really starting to take shape. Like Sarah Burke, I'm sure you know Sarah. You were telling me, I think we were talking about that earlier, but Sarah Burke was right there kind of really leading that movement, and you were kind of right in there with them, kind of elevating every competition, every day, every major competition like X Games, every smaller competition, every film part, every time you saw it, there was an improvement, there was a progression.
Yeah, there was lots of progression. Sarah and Christy actually were a little bit in front of me. So they were like the groundbreakers, and they were in front of me. I actually got on the Pro Tour for 1 year when Sarah was still on the Pro Tour, and every competition that I went to, Sarah was not at. And every competition that Sarah went to, I was not at.
Oh, no.
And I've actually met Sarah's mom, but when Sarah came to Park City, and that's where she had her brain injury that she never woke up from. And I was living in Park City, and I came to Whistler, which is where I had my brain injury.
Right. So let's talk about that. So, and maybe we'll tie in Sarah's story a little bit later as well, because obviously two very similar instances, but two very different outcomes. So you're in Whistler, Whistler Ski and Snowboard Invitational. Back then it was massive. It was like the biggest event of the year in town.
Yeah.
One of the biggest events in skiing at that point in time.
We still had we had a whole tour that wasn't FIS at the time. We had our own tour, and that was the World Tour Finals, and they had this big award show and all of the films and music, and
you had like Black Eyed Peas and Justin Timberlake down
there.
Yeah, it was a huge deal.
It was big.
So it was April of 2015, and it was the first World Tour Finals that I got invited to, and I was 18 at the time, and so Jamie and I drove up here with two friends, and I was like so ecstatic. I like heard about it for years and seen all these photos, and there was like the dress
gala.
up. Yeah, the gala. I got to dress up fancy with other skiers. That never happens.
Right?
And being like the girliest girl, that was like a highlight for me. I made the competition so I could go to the gala.
Right.
And they were supposed to hold a competition like one day, and it was so foggy and snowy up on the mountain, so they changed it to the next day because they had added in some weather days. And so it was like a beautiful day, really nice. And Jamie had learned a dub flat 7, which is like a double off-axis backflip, and she wanted to do it for the big air competition.
Right down in the like down at the bottom of the gondolas, like where everyone gathers, thousands of people. Yeah,
but she had been practicing it up on the Blackcomb Park in training.
Right.
And then the coach discovered, well, after the first run, she was in 4th place. And as we said, Jamie was the ultimate competitive person and didn't want to stay in 4th place. So her and her coach discussed that if she did the dub flat 7, she would,
And this is fourth for the tour or fourth for the event?
Fourth for the event.
All right. So you're basically in Whistler. You're up on the Black Park practicing, right? And then you get to the competition. And you did it in competition, correct? Yeah. So you're in the competition. You do your first run.
That's when she was in fourth place.
Yeah, you're sitting in fourth place. And then what happens?
And she was the second to last person to go for the second run. Mm-hmm. And so that's when her and I'm telling it because Jamie actually now at this point has no memory of this entire thing.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was gonna mention that is because you had mentioned that to me before. You said, "Hey, I may have to fill in." You actually told me my sister may have to fill in some of the blanks because there are literal blanks.
Yeah, it's really, I'll let you get back to it, but it's really interesting because I've done a lot of media and stuff, and the one question that I get asked all the time is, how did you feel when you were taken to the hospital in a coma? And I'm like, how did I feel? I was in a coma. I had no memory. Or they'll be like, what were you thinking? Like, why did you make this decision? And I'm like, I have no idea. So I'll let her talk, and then when we get back to like when my mind does come back, we can touch more on that.
Great.
Yeah. So the decision was made. Jamie was going to do dub flat 7. Everyone felt good about it. She tried it. She landed it in competition. in training earlier, and so she goes to drop in, and she slides the first few rails, and she takes off on the first jump, and we could see from her in the air standing at the top, and we could see her go around once and twice, and you couldn't quite see the landing because of the way that the hill is shaped. Mm-hmm. And within a few seconds you could tell she hadn't hit the second jump, so she must have fallen, which happens all the time in free skiing. It's not necessarily an emergency, although it is definitely a bummer. But right at that moment when I realized she must have fallen, the ski patrol radio crackled to life and said, we need all hands on deck and a helicopter in standby. And they don't say that if you are lightly injured, if you just spun out, if maybe you tore your knee. And so without saying anything, her coach and I just put on our skis and slid down right away. And Jamie was like face down on the snow with a pile of blood all around her face, like convulsing and twitching. The ski patrol was there right away. A few other people, more ski patrol came down right away, and they turned her over, and she was like as pale as the snow. Her eyes were rolled back in her head. Again, she was like convulsing and twitching, and she was like so deeply unconscious, not just a concussion knocked out.
In a different universe.
Like,
Just
she looked
gone.
like a zombie, like almost, besides the first responders, none of us that were there have ever seen somebody in that state before.
Right.
And the ski patrol in Whistler were amazing. They had a doctor on hill at all times, and they came down, and I was holding Jamie's head, and her body was like trying to arch her spine backwards, so I was trying to keep it from hitting into the snow more. Mm-hmm. And at the time, people kept being like, wake up, Jamie, even though in hindsight, it's like there was no way she was waking up to our voice or to anything at that time, but that's just kind of the natural thing to try to tell someone who's unconscious. And they wanted to put an IV in straight away to give her a medicine that would make her body stop twitching. It's like a paralyzing medicine. Mm-hmm. And so another competitor actually was like trying to hold down her forearm and kneeling on it with all of their weight. And Jamie was in this state, like a zombie state, like picking them up basically, because this is so unhuman and unnatural, and
the brain is short-circuiting and the body is reacting and doesn't know what it's supposed to do, so muscles are firing, things are just happening kind of thing, right?
Yeah. And in the medical field, that kind of like twitching that she was doing, like arching her back and like extending, and is like one of the signs of like dying basically. Like it is like, so it means that your body is so injured,
so stressed. And
so they got the IV and they were able to put in the medicine that worked pretty quickly. And then there was a lot of blood coming out of her mouth, and she had bit her tongue, but we didn't know whether that was the only reason or not. So they needed to secure the airway straight away so she didn't suffocate on her own, blood. And they actually put a pass in between her tongue and her teeth to help pry it open, and then they were able to get her mouth open because, again, her jaw was like clenched. It was like some of those dogs that have had fighting instincts where they grip on and they don't let go.
Right.
And then they were able to intubate her on the mountain. And actually, most ski resorts do not have a doctor on hill that has the capacity to IV and intubate. They must move them to the base where the clinic is. And at the time Whistler had that, I believe that the ski patrol have told us that was discontinued with the new ownership of Vail. And I want to bring a light to that because if Jamie was not intubated and IV'd on the mountain, she very well would not have even made it to Whistler Clinic still alive.
Right.
Which is why in our documentary, when Jamie meets the doctor who was on hill, his name is Bruce, and Jamie goes, "Everyone told me what you did saved my life," and he just goes, "Yeah, kind of, because that's what he did." And he did save her life. And then there was another ski patrol, Brian, who actually manually pumped her breath because once they intubated her, obviously there's not a machine at the bottom of this jump to attach it to. So he had to actually take the bag and open and close it. And the helicopter couldn't land right in the middle of the jumps. It was just a bit below where Blackcomb Park is. So they had to put her in a sled, and he's like standing over the sled, manually pumping her breath as we all moved down to the bottom of where the park was, just past it. And I wanted to get in the helicopter, and they said, "We need all of the space for everyone else." So they took her away, and that's like a vivid memory, was the like snow pellets hitting my face, and then my travel down from like downloading and coming down to the Whistler Clinic. Wow.
Let me ask you this. So obviously you've told this story many times, and you've probably heard it many times. But what does it feel to you when you first started hearing your sister tell these stories? When you first started to like be a little bit more cognizant, more yourself, to hear her tell this story from her point of view? Like, what does it feel like to you?
Well, when I first started hearing her and my mom tell the story and say that I was a miracle and that I had 1% chance of survival, I was not really believing them.
She thought we were just being over dramatic.
Right.
I didn't get it. So when I was in the hospital, I refused to believe I was in a hospital. So as my mind was coming back, because I had amnesia. So I was like the movie 50 First Dates, where like every day I would have no memory of the day before.
Oh, for real?
And then when my mind started to come back and I started to remember my short-term memory and things like that, they wanted me to be able to tell them where I was. And I refused to tell them I was in a hospital because I didn't think I was in a hospital. I had all these pictures all over my wall. I had a hammock in my room. My mom was sleeping in my room. So I would tell the nurses I was in a movie about a hospital. And when they poked me with the needles, it didn't hurt because it was a movie. And they were like, "How do we tell our patient it doesn't hurt because she's paralyzed?"
Right.
So I finally did say, my mom was like, "Technically, at this point, you're in inpatient rehab. So technically, you've passed beyond the hospital. You're not going back to the hospital. But you need to tell the nurse that you're in a hospital. But you don't have to believe it."
Right.
And I was like, "So I'm supposed to tell you I'm in a hospital?"
Well, that's wild because I know, I guess, because obviously we've gone through this. And you know, obviously you're comfortable enough now to be able to tell that story, where I did sense a bit of emotion and weight to it, but I'm sure you've gotten to a point now where you can separate a little bit just for the purposes of sharing the story, like separate the emotion from the story a little bit to that point.
Yes, although I often don't tell the story in like such detail that I was just able to share. We're usually a little bit more the cliff notes.
Right.
Because for many audiences, they mostly care about the cliff notes. But for here because it happened here, and a lot of your listeners are skiers, and the people who saved her life live in this community. I felt that it was a good space to share a bit deeper.
So let me ask you.
That is more emotional.
Let me ask you this then too. So first, before I get to this question, so you're in the hospital. What kind of do a Cliff's Notes version of kind of what the recovery process, maybe for the first like 4 or 5 months?
Yeah. Well, to go back to what you were saying about just my emotions towards the story, because I don't remember it.
Right.
So at first I was like in complete denial that it happened. And then when I left the hospital, I began to realize I had the accident and I had been in a hospital and I was recovering. Even though I always thought that I was farther along in my recovery process, I would think that I was just fine. And as some people like Jeff Schmuck would say, you could tell that I was not just fine when I thought I was. But the trick that really helped me with my recovery, because it took multiple years to get back to being just fine, maybe a little bit goofy and weird, but like that took time to get back to, was that I was an athlete. So I had the mindset that when you tear your ACL, you can't walk and you have to do rehabilitation and you will get back. So that even though I always knew I would be okay and I would get back to skiing and I would live a great life, I always knew I was fine. I knew I needed coaching. So I was open to all my therapy programs and I was open to all the external help that I had to be able to get back to who I am today. And a lot of people are very closed-minded to that because they think they're okay. Right. But I had the mindset that, you know what, every skier has a coach.
Right.
And so...
Yeah.
And you got to get back on the program.
Yeah. The Cliff Notes are that we found out that Jamie had sustained 8 spots of bleeding in her brain, including her right brainstem, which statistically they say that brainstem doesn't heal. So she was paralyzed on the right side.
All the way down?
Yeah. And the regaining mobility is in single digits for brainstem.
Right.
And statistically of how she arrived at the hospital, it was more likely that this brain injury would have claimed her life than not. So the doctors would say she's young and she was healthy, so we'll see what happens. She woke up from the coma at 10 days, which meant that she could open her eyes for just a few seconds and do a few on-command things like thumbs up or squeeze my hand, or what we had to train the nurses to say, a peace sign.
Not 2 fingers, peace sign.
So it was another few weeks that she was just kind of in this holding floor of slowly waking up. And it was like being born again. She couldn't sit up. She couldn't talk. She, used diapers. She kind of recognized her family members, but not all of us, because she thought at the time that she was like a little kid. And so the whole recovery was from there all the way up. It was growing up again. She was in the hospital, including the inpatient rehab, for 4 months. And then
was that GF Strong Center?
Was
that here or down in the States?
So she was treated at Vancouver General Hospital, and then we actually transferred her back to Salt Lake, because we live in Park City, at 8 days, because we had a rescue insurance called Global Rescue that was able to offer that transport service for us. So the rest of us could live at home, and we have dogs and such. So she was in the Salt Lake Hospital for 4 months and then released into our care. And at that point, she couldn't even be in a room alone. She couldn't go to the bathroom alone. She couldn't walk upstairs alone.
Yeah, I would forget. I would walk up the stairs and forget why I was walking up the stairs.
Or which room. There was like 3 different doors. Which room was our bedroom? We shared a room at the time.
Right.
I couldn't,
And so that was another few months, and she was going to outpatient therapy for speech, occupation, and physical therapy 5 days a week, as well as we did a lot of integrative health. So we had nature therapy, nutrition, aromatherapy, music. Music was a huge recovery tool. And I was actually talking about it with our Uber driver yesterday at 3:30 in the morning when we were catching our flight to come up here, about how our brains remember lyrics and song better than we remember anything else.
Right.
And music has been a pinnacle part of every culture around the world. And actually coming out of Jamie's coma, and when she started to remember things because of music. She listened to songs we had listened to before, and that's how she started to get memories back.
That's wild. I actually had a conversation last night we talked about the after party, and I just popped my head in and did hi. I was there for like 15 minutes, and then I left. And a song came on that I have a very specific memory of from that room. So when I've been in Whistler for 20 years, I used to go to Garf's when I was younger. I occasionally still do, but not very often. But I was there often. And when I was there was this song that played for a couple of years, and it was always played. And I usually heard it when I was like on or near the dance floor or something along those lines. That song came on, and it was this memory. And I was like, hey, that song that we just heard, there's like the memory combination. I'm like, my memory of that song is standing right in that spot over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is true. Like I have albums. I listen to so much music. That's one of my favorite things to do. And I'll listen to a song and I'll be like, oh, this is when I was on the bus from this town to this town through Morocco. Or this is when we were doing this thing. Or this is my sitting on the couch. This is my quiet me time song sort of thing. So hearing you say that really makes me happy and excited that that's kind of one of the like processes and I guess rehabilitation routes that you took.
Yeah, and Jamie really actually fixated on the song Style by Taylor Swift. It had recently come out, and such as many times little kids have a favorite song they want to play and repeat, so did Jamie.
Yeah.
And we actually we have this little choreographed dance routine to it that was actually a few years back on CBC News when we were on there. And so through the rehabilitation process, when we came back for Jamie's 1 year anniversary, my mom and I were really keen on coming back. And during the Multiplicity event, they brought Jamie up on stage and was like, last year she almost died. Many of you might remember that. And afterwards is when the ski patrol Brian came over to us and was like, I pumped your breath. And Jamie was like, what? And he was like, yeah, like I was there. I was on site. Like I pumped your breath. I kept you alive. And that was one of the first times Jamie realized that somebody else that wasn't her mom or her sister thought that it was a very severe accident. And he had actually said that they wrote her fatality report because statistically they didn't think that she'd make it to Vancouver alive, but they were trained to treat that one in a miracle chance, and that's what they did.
Wow.
And that's actually the turning point when, because like I mentioned, I was in disbelief about this whole thing. I was like, well, my mom says I'm a miracle. Like, how many moms say you're a miracle? Like,
Yeah, right.
Okay, you love me, Mom. That like I love you too. But then I came back here, and that's some of my first memories. Like my mind for that whole first year is still fuzzy, but I clearly remember up on the mountain, and I went to the ski patrol hut and talking to the ski patrol. Actually, the day after I had met Brian, and I met the rest of them and was told how miraculous my recovery was. And I was told by the ski patrol that I had the opportunity and the platform to share how they're fighting for the 1% chance created the 1% chance. And I had the power to be able to talk about those who helped me, because there are so many people in the town of Whistler that if they weren't doing their different jobs to their own personal best, the best of their ability, that they would have been the slip and I wouldn't have survived.
Right.
Like, I needed so many different people.
Yeah.
So was that kind of the first, you kind of just were alluding to it, was that one of the first moments when you're like, holy crap, like when it really sunk in, is meeting the people that were there at the event?
There was a meeting. A big moment was going into the ski patrol hut.
Yeah.
And another big moment was going into the ICU. at Vancouver General Hospital. They just let us through the locked doors. I had never remembered being in an ICU. They had, but I didn't know. I have never been in one since. And I went in, and it's scary. And it's really scary place. Everybody's just so still and on so many different devices, and everybody knew me and recognized me and knew my story, like in the hospital. Like they had worked there the previous year, and they had all these stories, and they were talking to my mom and sister about all these stories that I had no memory of. And then we were being brought by one of the nurses to go meet Dr. Saccone, and he was in a meeting, and he came out of the meeting. He looked at my mom and Jeannie, and then he looked at me. He looked back at my mom and Jeannie, and then he came out of the meeting with tears in his eyes. And he's an ICU neurologist, and he said, I had heard that you had lived, but to see you in front of me makes me realize why I do what I do. Like, to see you is the reason why I get up at all odd hours, and I do what I do, is to create this opportunity.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he voiced as well the power I had to share what he does to help individuals. And that was really life-changing for me and set in motion everything else I've been doing since then. The whole first year before we came up for the 1-year anniversary, we were just healing and
rehab and physical
recovery.
therapy and mental therapy, and I could easily dive into that because that stuff kind of really fascinates me as well. But I think, just to fit it in with time, I think getting to the part of you sharing this story and spreading the awareness for this is kind of what we should talk about now.
Yeah.
So a full year goes by.
Yeah.
You have these, I guess, realizations where you're finally like, holy smokes, you get the scale of the severity of what happened. And this is the first time it's really sinking in for you, for yourself, Jeannie. Having to basically be her support and bringing her back to health and seeing her with these small victories. Like a year later, you can look a year back and holy smokes, look where you are now. But small victories, like day after day after week after week, it must have been so emotionally exhausting, and like I can't even begin to imagine the emotion and the struggle that you went through with someone that you love, and then you get to a point where you see this and the light finally clicks. What was that kind of like for you, where you're like, oh, you get it? Maybe you weren't needing her to get it, but like you see, she finally gets to the point where she understands the weight of everything that happened, and you were there from the start, and you had to like absorb a lot of that for yourself and be that support. So was it kind of like a vindication? Maybe not a vindication, but like, like a reward, for the lack of a better term. Be like, hey, this I would have done it anyways, but that recognition of her and how'd that make you feel?
It was like an aha moment, as well as, there was still a lot of recovery after that we went through. And I was 18 and had turned 19, and I felt like I was, parenting a teenager.
That's a lot for a kid, right?
Yeah. But beyond just between the two of us, that 1 year was affected so many people, where like we had an après-ski event with a lot of the people who ran the festival, Sue and Natalie being some of them, and they brought her bib that had been cut off, and they talked about how they had it in their office and would talk to it every day for a year, and they held it up, and then the corner that had been cut off like crumbled, and it just was like this so significant moment of how this one injury that had been so affecting me and my family had actually been affecting this entire community, and how all brain injury is so common, and how there are that many people affected by each person's brain injury, that we had been doing some advocacy work, and seeing how bringing her here healed so many other people was healing for me. And it helped in those next stages that had their own level of difficultiness of, I was back competing on the World Cup tour and Jamie wasn't, and going through
I was crying a
that,
lot.
like her emotions, and still like there was, like we said, there was still years of recovery, but it was all very emotional and social recovery.
So like it could have been like and I'm talking about your personal experience. It was one of those things where I'm doing this for my sister. Everything I need to do is to get her back on to what she was before. That was probably like your ultimate, subconscious goal. I need to get her back to health, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is your personal mission. So it's almost like this is what I'm doing now for myself as well. And then you get to that realization where it's like, oh, what I've been doing isn't only a selfish act for our family and our close-knit group of friends. What I've been doing is actually helping many, many other people.
Right.
So that must have been like oh, wow. I'm sure like with all the despair and the trauma that everybody went through, physical, mental, emotional, I wonder if that was kind of almost like a weight off your shoulders or a lightening.
And it definitely spurred like the conception of our nonprofit work, where we started doing a lot of this peer-to-peer consulting.
And this is just right after this point? Like how did you move into that?
So when we met Dr. Saccone, and he was like, I actually changed a lot of my family involvement protocols because of your family and the way you guys treated Jamie, and were with this whole injury, and like where she is now is just beyond any chart could have predicted. And we were like, well, we would be happy to stay in contact. And he was like, would you be interested in speaking to other families that are going through this? And we were like, yeah. So that's when he started connecting us with other families that came into his care, and we were able to help kind of be a support system for them and be like, this is possible. Like talk to them, like go through a lot of things we went through. We weren't an official company. We were just consulting. We were just helping other people. And then that morphed, and we grew up more, and we healed more. And now we have an official nonprofit. And that is one of the things, among a few other missions, that we do, is work with brain injury survivors and their caregivers, starting at all different stages of recovery. Some are in the coma, some of them are years out.
Wow. And he was in the movie?
Yes.
And he was talking about how many lives that he thinks that you have saved doing this, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah,
I call him Miracle Mip. So he's Dr. Saccone to a lot of people, but to me, he's Miracle Mip.
Why is that?
Well, because his first name is Mip.
Oh.
He's
Mipender.
Mipender Saccone. Right. So his fancy name is Dr. Saccone, and for me, he's Miracle Mip.
Yeah, but his words in our documentary are probably one of the most healing things that he could say.
I think that's when I started to tear up.
Yeah, like it is so, and to give him credit, he had a 3-day-old baby and came up and filmed that interview and came to Jamie's wedding because he thought it was so important for him to be part of this story, and then stayed for a little bit of the reception and was like so apologetic that he needed to go back to Vancouver, and we were just in awe that he even like could make the trip up here.
Yeah, and speaking of the wedding, when we were here for the 1-year anniversary, another moment I remember, Jeannie and I are at the top of the mountain, and we're looking out at the mountains in Whistler, which are breathtaking, gorgeous view, and we're looking out, and Jeannie goes, "So, Jamie, you're going to get married here." And I was like, Jeannie, I've never had a boyfriend over 3 months. Like, I don't really know if, like, marriage is in my future going to happen. Like, not anytime soon. And she was like, it's going to be here, though. You're going to come back to the mountain that almost took your life, and you're going to stand at the top, and you're going to marry the love of your life.
Yeah.
And
she did.
I did. And that was one of the most emotional moments of my life, like when I was standing up at the top and I was looking out at the same mountains, and I had my doctor in the front row of my wedding, and I was looking over at the person who had become the love of my life, and I was back to the mountain that had almost took my life. It was so emotional. Yeah. And that happened recently. Another, like, the best moment of my life was on the mountain that was the worst moment of my life.
And I love that you're able to, I guess, confront those challenges and confront those demons. Because, when people have those accidents and they go back to the scene or they revisit something. There's a lot of power to it. So the fact that you've taken control of that has been cool by, returning a year after your accident. Yeah. And then being like, all right, I'm going to get married. And a few years later, there you are again, right?
We actually came many years from her accident over that anniversary and for the festival. And we live in a ski town, but we came here for our like spring holiday, and we would ski. And I always say, early April is the best time to ski Whistler because there's so much powder at the top.
Don't tell everybody.
Sorry. But it was so, and COVID stopped that trend for us because obviously we couldn't be here. But from the 1 year until COVID hit, we came every year during that time. And we grew the love for Whistler, where the first year back was like very emotional. And then after that, I was just like, it always held this very special place, and it continues to.
Yeah, and in 2019, I actually came back to Whistler and spoke at Multiplicity at the World Ski and Snowboard Festival.
I think I was at that event, yeah.
And my future husband, we weren't even engaged yet. So he's my boyfriend at the time, but Reggie was here, and so then he came back and we got married here. But one of the things that's like super surreal to me is that when Jeannie said I was going to get married in Whistler, that was 7 years before it happened. And I married a snowboard boy who loves the mountains so much. He wakes up at 5 o'clock on the mornings in the winter to get up there. It just was by far the right place for my life to get married, but we didn't. How did we know all that?
You didn't. You put it out there. Do you believe in like manifesting, positivity in your life, or like this, like what they say within The Secret, something along those things? You put it in your mind and you kind of manifest it. You work towards it.
Yeah. So I fully believe in the untapped capability of the human brain.
You've witnessed it firsthand.
Yeah, we use as humans such little amount of our brain that I think that so many of these things, my personal belief is that so many things that people can describe as manifesting or faith-based or things like that are us using parts of our brain that we're not conscious of using. So I think that it was, yes, we put this idea in way before it ever happened, but also it was given that Jamie was going to marry somebody who loved the mountains and liked to ski or snowboard, because that is like so much of our identity. Yeah. And so then, and we're a very strong, connected and somewhat intimidating family. So if somebody was going to marry in, they were kind of going to marry into the idea that the micromanager who ended up being the producer of the family was going to have stake in this wedding. And I also have done event production, so I helped design Jamie's ring along with our mom and Jamie's fiance, and I helped plan pretty much all the details of the wedding. So some of our family and friends were joking that it's my wedding that Jamie and Reggie got married at, and he loved that because he didn't want to have to pick out all the details. He wanted to come to a wedding.
He's like, so I get to go to the top of the mountain and not really do anything.
So you're gonna throw us a party? Thanks.
Have a party at the top of a mountain and walk up on the gondola with my snowboard? Okay.
Yeah, like it was great, and he was interested in being involved in some of it, but he didn't. That wasn't his expertise to plan an event. It was mine. Right.
And I love that too. And like hearing you say that, I'm going to ask you, do you feel you have like a sense of guardianship over her at this point still a little bit? Because you went through so long, right? Like you had mentioned, you were her caretaker. And now that she's kind of back on her own, back on her own 2 feet, things are going in the right direction. She's got married. She's moving forward. Do you still feel a bit of that guardianship over her?
Sometimes. It's funny because everybody we meet thinks that I am the older sister now.
I did until you mentioned it. Yeah. You alluded to it earlier.
Well, because we really had this flip-flop from this injury where, and like I mentioned to you earlier, like I always have once I turned 25, which now I'm 27, like I always am the driver. I always plan our trips. And it's funny because I learned through the process of making this film that the micromanager is called a producer in the film world, and I get a title, and people think I'm important because I was always just the micromanager, and I also did like a lot of the press, and like it is interesting because it is Jamie's accident, but it is also like my story, and it's very much like my coming of age. Like I was at, you know, those very pivotal moments of life, being like 18, 19, 20. And I, at that point also, when I returned to the sport, had to return to the sport for me. I couldn't just be following her around.
Right.
Like I told you, I got into the sport to follow her. I followed her through much of the sport, and she wasn't going to be in the sport, so I had to be in it for myself. And I had to do that while still helping to take care of her and take care of the family. And when you have a family trauma, you lean on each other a lot. And at the same time, everybody's living through the trauma, so the thing that triggers you triggers them. So I also, you know, had my own therapy that I worked through, and you know, I still see a therapist, and there's still other life that has happened since her injury. But yeah, I do definitely have, I think that she's also like very stuck with me. Like we started the nonprofit together, like I'm the producer of the film, like she's at her house all the time. Like people are like, you're like, you know, I mean, she is independent and has a house and a husband and a dog.
Yeah, but
She's
like
way more connected than many.
You guys don't share a room anymore, but you probably still could.
Yeah. When we went to Mountain Film, we were screening a Mountain Film in Telluride, Colorado this summer, and we're just walking down the street, and this group of people go, the MoCrazy sisters, the MoCrazy sisters, oh, we loved your film, and all this stuff, but the MoCrazy sisters sticks around, and so that's who we
and
were
our mom
and are, and
Yeah, but people love that too, right?
Yeah.
You want to see, well, that's who they are. They get to know your story, and if they can connect with you in real life, they're like, oh, they are just like that. This is a real thing, which is cool. So let me ask you this: film was really beautiful.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. And that's why I appreciate the film festivals like IF3, which you're here for, is because it's not just ski. There's a lot of really great stories that are tied around skiing and snowboarding with yours that I think deserve to be seen.
Thank you.
Now, moving forward with, you have a foundation, a nonprofit, and is it going to be something maybe similar to like a High Fives where you're focusing on, families where are you raising funds for families with TBIs? Are you going to be doing fundraisers? Is it something that you're going to go and start doing more speaking engagements, that sort of thing? Like, are you familiar with, I'm sure you know Mike Shaw as well.
Yes,
I'm a High Fives participant.
Are you? Okay.
So I do know High Fives. I am a participant, and I do go to brain injury related conferences. I was actually last week at one in Ohio and one in Maine, and we are screening our film, which is now an award-winning short documentary that we're coming back to Whistler for. And then I give a keynote. But we also are doing a lot of policy and protocol stuff, which is kind of different than High Fives and like behind the scenes. But because what we realized in brain injury is that there's so little attention and awareness on the opportunities needed to have a recovery. And that with peer-reviewed scientific information, we know that anybody at any age can use neuroplasticity to rewire their brain. So even though with a brain injury, some of your brain pathways do permanently die, you can create pathways to get to the same destination, to accomplish the same things, by setting habits and doing the habits for long enough that you're actually changing your brain. But in order for that to happen, you need the opportunities for long enough healing and the awareness that you can rewire your brain.
Yeah, we also do a lot of education in the medical field as well. So Jamie's story is actually part of the syllabus for the medical school in Vancouver, for British Columbia Medical School, and they study her accident and story. And we've done some filming with them, and so we're working on that as well. And also our mom is a PhD candidate studying the hard science behind the integrative health we did. And like our long-term goals is to be able to have a lot of that integrative health be part of the protocol and have that be part of the protocol
Insurance
everywhere
covers.
and insurance covered everywhere. Because you basically are often predestined to whether you will or will not recover based on where your brain injury was and what accessibility you have. Where we live in Utah, we get severe traumatic brain injuries from all of our surrounding states, and having to
They
be
fly into Utah.
transferred to another state to have your recovery, and then going back as soon as you're checked out of the hospital at that 4 or 5 month mark and not having the accessibility to continue to recover caps that person at staying at that stage of recovery. So we do a lot of the policy and medical education, as well as the peer-to-peer support. And we're having actually our first annual Alive to Thrive Day hosted at Snowbird, Utah, March 23rd of this year, where we are partnered with Wasatch Adaptive. They're sponsoring for us to bring 8 athletes or survivors on hill to be skiers or snowboarders.
With any ability level from a brain injury. So if you've thought, like, so many people have contacted me from all over the world and been like, I used to ski and then I had a brain injury, so of course I can never ski again because my balance is off. It's not safe for me because my balance is off. Well, with Wasatch Adaptive, you can go skiing again.
That's great. Yeah, Whistler has a great adaptive program here as well.
Yeah, we've spoken with them.
Yeah, and we've heard wonderful things about them. And there's a couple more. I was actually a participant at the National Ability Center in Park City. So there's a sprinkling of these amazing adaptive programs around the Salt Lake area, and they all are amazing. We just happened to have a sponsorship with Wasatch Adaptive for this event on March 23rd.
You also skied a few days in Breckenridge, Colorado with one. So that's another thing that we like to do, is help connect these people that have reached out to us from all the media and attention that Jamie's story has had, and be like, you can also mountain bike or ski or paddleboard, because there are organizations that can help you do that and be able to be that connecting point between, because a lot of people are just so lost. They don't know that connecting. They don't know. And there's so much more.
And they're so depressed.
Yeah. In this rehabilitation that goes into it, and there's so many organizations that can help, or things such as, like, Jamie went back to college. We've also had some people go and audit classes or sign up for community college, and they're like, I never thought of that. But when you actually grow up, you have schooling, and we talked about different ways of schooling, but everyone has in these cultures schooling that makes their brain think and work in certain ways. So to go back to being an independent adult, why not go take a class?
And like we said at the beginning, when you're comparing yourself to other people, you kind of actually have to do that. So you have to figure out that when you are recovering from your brain injury, I called one of my friends 20 times because he didn't answer his phone. And let me tell you, at 23 years old, that is not appropriate. That's not appropriate at any age.
Like, what's wrong?
But I didn't know that.
Right.
I didn't know what was appropriate and what's not.
Interesting. So just little things that were just literally knocked out of you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you have to, and it's funny because people think, I like that you brought that up, because people think, well, I have to learn how to walk, and I just relearn how to, feed myself. But you also have to learn how to be a human.
Yeah. Social interaction is huge, and that's one of the things that a lot of people actually never learn and never get over, because a lot of people don't realize you have to relearn it. Like,
because if you actually study parenting, or you are around people who are parenting, social skills are taught.
Yeah.
We're taught social skills in a society. And so
when
exactly. You're relearning everything.
You don't hit your friend, right? You say, hey, can I have this, please? And if you don't,
or when you were a teenager, where you were like, oh my God, should I say this in a text message? Or dude, that was really weird. Why did you do that? We're taught by peers, we're taught by adults, we're taught in school, we're taught social skills. So when you are basically reborn, that is something that you have to learn. So a lot of brain injury survivors are like, my personality changed because people don't want to hang out with me, or they think I'm weird, or all these things. And we more have the mindset of, it's not really necessarily that core personality that changed. It's that nobody really fostered the expansion of their social skills.
Interesting,
because they think because
they expect you to get back to what you were.
Yeah.
And then you just said the words reborn.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense, because you basically are starting from basically it's like having a house, and you tear the house down to the foundation. So the foundation is still there, but everything you see, you can rebuild.
Yeah. And it's not going to be exactly the same. It's called
Right.
a life-changing injury for a reason.
Right.
And as we've talked about on this podcast, it changed me. It changed her. So when people are like, well, is Jamie back? And I'm like, back to what? Like, it's been 4 years. Like, she went through this huge trauma. She's not a skier anymore. No, she is not a 22-year-old professional skier anymore. But can she hold a good conversation? Did she get straight A's in university? Does she, like, travel independently, like, have a house? Yes. Like, she's a fully functioning intellectual adult. If that's what you mean by back, then yes.
But she's not maybe the exact same person you knew in the past.
I wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, her core personality is, but
Yeah, which is
You know.
why.
Is that you figure that's her soul?
Yeah, which is why one of my like proudest things is that recently the New York Times and CNN both called me goofy, and I love that because I think that prior to my accident I was goofy. I kind of did some strange things and then it took a long time to get back to being comfortable enough and able to interact with other people and perceptive of like what you're saying with your body language and just like all those little details. You, like Jeannie said, you have to relearn all of them, and to be able to get back to being a goofy person who wags their tail and knows that that's goofy was like meant that I was healed. And
Excellent.
yeah.
Very neat. I'm going to ask you one last question. So based with regards to that, I was going to maybe ask it off, but I want to ask this question. So being that you've had to learn it, I was speaking with Jeff specifically, and he's like, he kind of let me know kind of who you were as a person and what you are now. And he's like, she's going to be very attentive to you. Eye contact. She's going to be observing you. And it's just one of those things. And he mentioned it's probably because of what we were just talking about. You're relearning how to be a human, essentially, right? You're finding about you obviously, if you have that goofy like energy that seems to be the core, which you mentioned, but then you have to learn how to do all these other little things. And you just mentioned, my body language. Then I can, she has been observing what I'm doing, right? So is that something that you're actively doing? Is this paying attention and studying? Almost in a way like you would in like you're learning a subject at school. You're trying to learn the people that you're with to try and get back on track to the societal normality. Does that make sense, that question?
Yeah. Well, definitely at the beginning, for the first couple of years, I was very attentively studying because, like I mentioned, I had to relearn interactions and stuff. And I would say in general now, I'm back to just being relaxed, which is why I say being called goofy, like being able to just like be myself.
Right.
But then it's interesting because I did all that, and now I do a lot of media stuff, and everything about you in the media is looked at and like gives a message. So I've actually had media training. So like I've had, so it has been it started out as looking at people and analyzing them because I needed to know for my recovery.
Part of your journey, right?
And that was a good 5 years or longer. And then it like morphed. We're at like 8 years now. So it morphed from like the 5 years of like really looking for my brain injury recovery to now looking for how I want to be presented in media and stuff.
Right.
I would add to that also, so our mother had a federal grant to teach self-esteem to women. She had a Title IX grant when we were kids. And I think that a lot of this, especially observant of body language, comes out of a lot of those teachings that she had, where we actually have some high school interns working for MoCrazy Strong right now that are 3 high school girls, and they presented an idea for a fundraiser event to us. And part of our feedback was also on, what their eye contact was, what their body language was, because especially being young women in a business role, and I also do diplomacy work, reading people and presenting yourself in a certain way is like a huge aspect. So I am not studying people for my own TBI recovery, but being perceptive to how the conversation is going, or am I presenting myself with confidence, all of these things that when you're just an athlete or just doing other things in life you might not think of, with a lot of the work that we do now is actually very relevant to how we are perceived and how we can foster a conversation based on knowing how it's coming across to the other person as well off of their body language.
Interesting. There's so much that's come out of this for the positive. Do you see it that way? Have you come to terms where you're, I don't know about grateful, but
yeah, honestly,
grateful
I'd
or
say
thankful?
I'd say grateful. And a lot of people are surprised because I had such an amazing life before my accident. And I did. And I loved it. I loved that portion of my life. But I love this portion of my life as well. And it's amazing what's been opened. And I do feel lucky and grateful because, you know, everybody has to end their professional career at some point. And so mine was just abrupt and sudden.
Yes, the choice was made for you.
Yeah, and I didn't decide it, but then I have a whole career that's still so tied into climbing alternative peaks in the mountains, and I'm able to have amazing ski days with my husband and the rest of my family, and I love that. And I'm also able to do something that I believe is helping. I've heard so many times it's helping millions of lives, and that's something we didn't really touch on. It's been an aspect of my whole life that I've wanted to figure out how to give people opportunities. When I was actually 10 years old for Christmas from Santa, I asked to sponsor a girl in a third world country so she could have education. And when I went down and I saw my stocking and I saw everyone else's stocking filled with stuff, I was like, okay, I'm not sure if this was a good idea. But that was me. I always, my whole life, have wanted to give people opportunities. And so now I have a beautiful way to give people opportunities.
That's amazing. Yeah. Before we go, could you please tell everybody how to find more information about your nonprofit and some of the initiatives that you're putting forward?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd like to tell everyone about is that we will be back in Whistler. We will be here end of November, beginning of December for the Whistler Film Festival.
All right.
So that is really exciting. So everybody who listens to this podcast, if you would like to come and watch our film,
please come and bring your friends.
Please come, bring your friends. You can meet us. We're going to be having lots of parties and lots of events around that celebration. It's going to be kind of our biggest celebration because there are so many hometown heroes, and the hometown heroes are all the Whistler heroes.
Amazing. So we're here for IF3 right now. For those of you for people that have seen the movie and are probably going to share this, like, hey, this movie is really cool, we should go see it. Well, you're going to be back.
Yes.
2023, if you're listening to this down in the future, you could probably find it online, I'm sure, at that point. Yes. Will it be released online?
It will be. We are looking to publicly release it in March of 2024. March is Brain Injury Awareness Month.
Nice tie-in.
Which is why we're also having our Alive to Thrive Day on March 23rd. Mm-hmm. And we'll be skiing all day at Snowbird Mountain. And then we'll be screening our award-winning documentary, listening to music, having some fundraiser, and a great happy experience about brain injury.
I love it. So what's the name of the foundation that you found?
The foundation is MoCrazy Strong, and our film is #MoCrazy Strong. So everything MoCrazy Strong, you will find us.
And for those of you that can't see the YouTube, she got it tattooed on her arm.
Yeah, I have it tattooed on my arm, and Jeanee, actually, within the first 24 hours of my accident, she started the hashtag on Instagram, MoCrazyStrong, to bring together all my supporters and friends and everyone around the world, little ski community who knew of my accident, so they could keep being updated on how it progressed. And that turned into our nonprofit, which turned into the title of our film, #MoCrazyStrong.
One of the benefits of social media, right?
Yes, and you can follow us on social media. I'm Jeanee Crane-Mauzy.
I'm Jamie MoCrazy on social media, and
please reach out. Follow our nonprofit, join in,
and come to our Alive Day, and we'll be back in Whistler.
I love it. Well, I'll make sure to put links for all that on your show notes page, on the YouTube channel, and on the podcast releases on the website as well. Awesome. Thanks for your time today. It was really great chatting with you, and we've got another full day of IF3 Festival, the award show tomorrow.
Yes.
So we'll go have some fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was the most emotional podcast that Jeannie and I have maybe ever done.
For real?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
I could tell looking at both of us in our eyes, it was very, very vulnerable for us, because whenever we come back to Whistler, we have so many memories that are, like I mentioned, amazing and terrifying. And so to share this story with this crowd, like, we just know that the individuals who will be hearing this probably know somebody who was involved or was involved themselves.
Well, I'm honored to have you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
You've been listening to the Low Pressure Podcast, the podcast for skiers. This has been a Redmark Media production.